And we don't have time now to go deep into this huge philosophical question. This is a question that has been there in Western tradition from the very beginning, since Heraclitus and Parmenides, if you want, since the ontology of becoming, of the world as permanent flux, and the ontology of being, which then Plato developed in such a sophisticated manner that it is still pervading our contemporary culture. We live in a highly Platonic culture, of course mediated by Descartes, a highly Cartesian culture, and by a number of other people, of course. It's not just placing an origin in a person. But it is quite an anomaly if we look into other cultures that have been living in the world and that have been producing understandings of the world in terms of movement and change, rather than attempting to fix it. Just take into consideration that the verb being, the verb to be, that is particularly articulated since the Greek tradition, doesn't exist in Chinese, for example. So it's quite a historical anomaly what emerged in ancient Greece with the logos, with the attempt to rationalize the world and reduce it to discrete entities that are, rather than are always in a process of becoming, which is the alternative way, not the only, of course, but it's one other way of thinking the world. So not in terms of discrete entities that are already what they are, but of permanent process of emergence of things that we cannot anticipate, not only because we cannot know how a system that we are looking at is going to behave, but because our very perception is changing, so our thinking is in motion as well. And that is the crucial question. So the other part of the project then is how do we actually develop other kind of technological paradigms that invert in a way or produce a different kind of approach that, rather than being based on this Platonic tradition, Cartesian tradition of identifying reality and producing discrete quanta of information that we can then control and manipulate in order to anticipate and predict. What happens if we undertake a very radically different standpoint, trying to understand movement in new ways, and thereby producing new kinds of techno-cultural paradigms, different from what we know so far about mechanicism or informational technologies, but of course also reworking these. It's not just about trying to invent something completely new. We can of course rework everything that we have at hand, as many of the people here are doing. So, yeah, of course there are many important ethical issues behind here, which maybe we will see later. Techne, as you know from ancient Greek again, is like a particular bond that we can't quite understand from our current perspective, I think, between arts and technologies, or crafts and technologies, arts and crafts, which maybe we need again to go back to. So this difference, this even ontological difference that we tend to reproduce nowadays, of the completely different methodology of science versus the arts, and so on, maybe has to be rethought also. What kinds of presumptions are there behind trying to identify certain functions in reality versus developing certain creative kind of environments? How far can we bring this together into a new kind of technique, which does not presume this Cartesian framework of disembodiment of the abstract mind that is distinct from its material substrate, which is the way information is precisely described as it emerged in a particular historical context in the 20th century as a highly contingent paradigm. So, can't see the one of the most important questions that this project is going to try to address is something that I think some of you have pointed towards: the extreme reductionism that contemporary mainstream technologies, research fields, most, have with regard to emotions, or let's say affects, which is an even broader concept. Emotions would be the already identifiable subjective emotions that make you identifiable as a human subject. That affects can be a much larger concept of whatever force affects, and this affect is. So the world as affective field of forces. We have seen already some beautiful examples of how this is happening, but there are many, many more. I mean, emoticons, for example, have not been mentioned yet, I think, and yet they are a very striking, clear example of emotional reductionism in our daily internet relations, or mobile and so on, whereby the important thing that I think we can try to understand is how emoticon is linked to a particular economy of affects, an economy that has also a choreography assigned to it. So, for example, every time that if you use Facebook, I don't, but maybe most of you do, whenever you click I like it, which has got, of course, this smiling emoticon assigned, that has particular, very specific economic consequences within a given system. It can put up the value of something in the stock market, for example, or it can trace your tastes as a consumer in order to send you publicity, for example, of a very particular kind. So all this, of course, is happening. We are now far more advanced than Brave New World, or all these dystopian literary projections that were done in the last century. We are now far more advanced in terms of being immersed in a control society than whatever they were still imagining. And the crucial issue of why we are or how we are immersed in that control society in a problematic way is what we were saying before in our discussion. How we come to desire this overexposure of data, this overexposure of which has, after all, I think, absolutely no meaning, no function other than your assimilation in a particular economy, as a consumer, as a prosumer. Of course, all of this is very contingent. I hope that we have a very strong discussion later. So the double economy of gesture, in this case you have the gesture of the smile, and you have the gesture of the click that is assigned to it, which gives it the economy. Of course, now it is a click. When you wear the Google Glass, or whatever its name is, it will be even less noticeable. It will be even more. It will be even easier to be assimilated in that economy. Maybe you blink or you say yes or whatever. You don't even have to click in order to make that emoticon be an affirmative action within a given economy. Not only that, but of course many of these formulations are subject to patenting, to trademark. So even when it comes down to movement, to these little choreographies that we perform all the time, you may know this famous courts case that was happening not long ago between Samsung and Apple, where finally Apple won the case in which they were claiming the patent for the movements that you perform with the screen. So it's eventually already happening that our very movements, the ones we perform, are trademarked. So nonverbal communication is a hugely important question. Politicians know this, but they don't always perform it very well. Now the crucial question for me is here, in this translation, how do we really interpret a gesture? Even my gestures here. How would you translate my expressions as I talk to emoticons?